No. And so I think you'll very much, her book is really excellent. It's very much of a personal approach to apologetics and how apologetics radically changed her whole Christian life and made it possible for her to not only explain the gospel to others, but actually defend the truthfulness of the gospel. So a very, very valuable book. I think it adds significantly to Christian apologetics. Millie also mentioned our Francis Schaeffer book, which is published now. And by the way, Eric Smith contributed significantly to this book. So he is listed as a co-author of the book. So we will go through that book systematically. Actually, we'll cover some of it tonight, and then hopefully you'll be able to actually get the book from Amazon and be able to read ahead as we continue over the next several weeks with our study of Francis Schaeffer, a retrospective on his life and legacy. Yes, Mark?
I'm going to ask you a question. I meant to ask you this before. You list like 10 different books by Schaeffer. Recommended reading?
Yes.
Which book would you recommend for someone who's never read Schaeffer to start with? And is there a...
Well, he wrote about 24, and I focused on 10 in particular.
Right.
Let's see, one book. It actually could be a Christian Manifesto, which was one of his last books. I believe Schaeffer died in 1984. I believe he wrote the Christian Manifesto in 82. Now, probably his most famous book, though, is How Should We Then Live?, which was kind of an overview of the rise and decline of Western civilization. And it is truly a tour de force. So that's the one that probably he's best known for.
I just thought while I'm online tomorrow ordering your book, I might order one or two of his too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So Christian Manifesto and How Should We Then Live, I guess would be my preferences. Yeah. Well, good to see you all who are joining us via Zoom, and very much again looking forward to our session this evening. So we have finished our introductory material for this course. Now we can actually get directly into the life and legacy of Francis Schaeffer himself. So we started off several weeks ago talking about how our times, they are a-changin', to borrow the title from a Bob Dylan song of the 1960s, probably more appropriate today than even when he wrote it. So the times, they have changed, and in most respects, not for the better. Then we went on from there to talk about several articles. I think they're just very, very powerful articles. Two by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Harvard commencement address, which again, talk about a tour de force. That article is, as you know, really significant. Then we also talked about Solzhenitsyn's Templeton address. From there, we looked at William Barr's address at Notre Dame, an address that he delivered only about 3 years ago at Notre Dame. And then we finished up with a relatively short article by Albert Mohler, The Imperative of Christian Cultural Engagement. The subtitle of that article is Christians Did Not Start the Culture Wars, but we certainly cannot evade them either. So as we transition into focusing on Francis Schaeffer for the rest of our course, I'd like to do this or introduce it by way of a PowerPoint presentation. And with a little help from our friends, I think I can muddle through this. Are you impressed so far? Okay. All right. How do we get?
Drag that. You can drag it, or hit more, and then you can hide it. And then hit on the far right.
Oh, more. Okay.
And I think hide video count there.
Click it.
Yeah, that worked.
Yeah, it sure is. Drag it up or down.
Okay, let's see. All right, well, hopefully that won't intrude too much. All right, so this is our Areopagus graphic. Many of you have seen it before. It's very representative of so many of the things that we emphasize in our ministry. You see prominently featured C.S. Lewis, bibliology, of course, and you see up there in the upper right-hand corner, well, that's Francis Schaeffer. And so this is the new book, as you see, by me with Eric Smith. And as I said, Eric contributed significantly to the book. All right, the contents, 7 chapters plus an introduction and then plus an appendix. So let's get right into it. And this will just be kind of a very brief overview of what we'll be talking about, as I've said, the next several weeks. My introduction to Christian apologetics came just probably a couple of years out of college. And the book that first arrested my interest in apologetics was Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. You see there, it was published in 1972. It was perhaps the most popular Christian apologetic book of the 1970s. It probably introduced tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people to Christian apologetics. And of course, then I went on from there to read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Also, I had a brother who had attended New Orleans Southern Baptist Seminary, and he had sat under the teaching of Clark Pinnock, and Clark Pinnock had written Set Forth Your Case, and I remember reading that as well. Schaeffer's significance, all right. Francis Schaeffer is oftentimes regarded as the father of Christian cultural apologetics. I think he's one of the 2 most significant, influential Christian thinkers of the 20th century, along with that other guy. That other guy, we have an entire course on that other guy's life and works, and we also have an entire course devoted to Mere Christianity as well. I would say that Schaeffer is probably one of the 20 most significant influential figures in all of American Christian history. And you see some others there that I would include in that very, very elite list. Most of those are probably familiar names to you. All right, now in terms of his initial writings, and Mark just asked about which books I would recommend primarily that Schaeffer wrote. Well, the first 3 books that he published is his Apologetics trilogy. And this is basically classical Christian apologetics. He always has his own original, take on all of this. But if you've read Mere Christianity and other apologetics books, you would find these 3 books: The God Who Is There, Escape from Reason, and He Is There and He Is Not Silent, to be, I think, something that you'd enjoy very much and undoubtedly would enrich your understanding of Christian apologetics, regardless of how much apologetics you've read in past years. But his primary contribution is to Christian cultural apologetics. In other words, emphasizing the lordship of Jesus Christ over the entire span of life. Not just our religious life, not just how we relate to our family and our involvement in our church and so on, but how does the Christian faith impact how we think about everything from politics to the arts and everything in between. That's basically cultural apologetics. He's also well known for his ministry at L'Abri. L'Abri is a Christian community that he founded in the mid-1950s in Switzerland. L'Abri means the shelter, and we'll talk a whole lot more about that as we go along. And that ministry at L'Abri really, I think, serves as I say here, the ultimate Christian apologetic. In other words, how do we take Christian apologetics and apply it, to our daily life and how we interact with others? And it was a phenomenal ministry. And then also I see Francis Schaeffer as truly a prophetic voice for our time. I think he's more relevant today than he was 40 and 50 years ago, as our society and our culture has continued to deteriorate. His message is just as pertinent as ever. He is, in fact, a cultural watchman. And this is how he would explain his ministry in general. This is a quote that also I incorporated into your study guide. It says, "Through my work, there's a common unifying theme, which I would define as the lordship of Christ in the totality of life. If Christ is indeed Lord, he must be Lord of all of life, in spiritual matters, obviously, but just as much across the whole spectrum of life, including intellectual matters. Our Christian faith should very much influence how we think about, the challenges of the intellectual challenges that we encounter in life. And also every area of culture, law, and government." He says, I would want to emphasize throughout my work the importance of evangelism, obviously. In fact, he saw himself right up to the time of his death as primarily a Christian evangelist. But we would say, okay, an unorthodox evangelist. And what I mean by unorthodox is it wasn't just the standard evangelical approach to evangelism. So throughout my work, the importance of evangelism, the need to walk daily with the Lord, to study God's word and live a life of prayer, and show forth the love, compassion, and holiness of our Lord. That is preeminently why we've been called into the body of Christ. But he goes on to say we must also emphasize equally at the same time the need to live this out in every area of culture and society. So that paragraph, short paragraph, is reproduced in 2 or 3 of his writings, and it really does, I think, very effectively summarize his life and ministry. All right, now he wrote a book in the late 1970s called "Whatever Happened to the Human Race." And I think that's a fit title for at least a portion of what we focus on in this course, as what we see going on in America today is nothing short of cultural homicide. The times, they are a-changing, as Bob Dylan wrote, and again, certainly not for the better. So cultural homicide, there are, as you know, many people in great positions of power and influence who hate most everything about American history and American traditions that we love and appreciate so much. So cultural homicide, how is that expressed? Well, in an anti-God, secularistic form, which, the exclusion of the Christian faith from virtually every area of public life. My wife Dolly can talk about how when she started teaching public school back in the 70s, a lot of the teachers would actually open the day, praying with their students. A teacher like that would not last long today, as you know.
Also, we can have a Bible study.
Okay, even short Bible devotionals and so on. So secularism, which is an explicitly, again, anti-God orientation, is so dominant, and it really controls the agenda today. Also socialism, and in theory, what's wrong with socialism anyway? Karl Marx, he's a very nice looking fellow. And he borrowed actually a phrase that was used by a prior socialist, but you're familiar with it and you probably attribute it to Karl Marx, And that is from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Now, by the way, that's how many Christian movements have functioned throughout the last 2,000 years. But keep in mind that when Christians would practice that theme, it was all voluntary and it was all spirit-led. It was not government mandated and government controlled. And that's the fundamental difference. So many would associate socialism with Karl Marx and this idea of from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And what could possibly be wrong with that? Well, I'll show you a picture of somebody who understood socialism better than anyone, Lenin. And Lenin wrote that the goal of socialism is communism. Socialism is merely a stepping stone to the ultimate goal, and that is government control, totalitarian government control over every aspect of our lives. And we see that virtually every week and month, more government intrusion into our lives. So it's anything but, a healthy social political system, to say the least. Also, sexualism. And we hear now in the news about how elementary schools are incorporating the LGBTQ agenda and pushing that on kindergartners, first and second graders, and so on. And this is just so incredibly perverse. I mean, it's almost breathtaking, isn't it? And yet this is, the times have changed, and this is the wave of the future, apparently, in public education. Racialism, boy, this is toxic. And that is seeing everyone and everything in life through a racial prism. It's this idea that people should be judged and stereotyped according to their race and their racial profile. Nothing could be more anti-biblical than racialism. Now, what's the difference in racialism and racism? Well, oftentimes they run along parallel tracks. But racism, of course, is this idea that certain races and all are superior or inferior to others. Racialism is this absolute fixation on race. Everything is processed through a racial prism, as I said, and very, very anti-biblical. And we see that expressed in critical race theory. I wrote a book on critical race theory a couple of years ago, and things like the 1619 Project as well. Then anesthetism, kind of a challenging word to even pronounce, but it's this idea that if the government's going to control our lives, then it really requires that we not be clear, deep thinkers, but rather that our minds have been muddled and confused through all the cultural chaos we see around us, all the stimulus overload, all the audio and visual overstimulation that we are subjected to constantly. And you go into many people's homes and the TV is on constantly, even when they're not actually paying attention and watching it. And you go into restaurants to eat and they bombard you with trash music. And drugs are a part of that, of course. And it's basically just to dull people's sensibilities and sensitivities. And people who function on that level are more easily controlled and manipulated by the state. Okay. So anesthetism is, I think, a vital component of what we see in America today as cultural homicide. Now, in the book and in our studies, in fact, we'll get into this evening, I start by addressing a few themes in a book that Rod Dreher wrote back in 2017 called The Benedict Option. In fact, we devoted, I think, about 8 or 10 hours one summer to going through that book and analyzing and critiquing it and so on. And it also correlates with a book I wrote in 2020 called American Crisis, cultural Marxism and the culture war, a Christian response. Now, the solution to all of this, as Francis Schaeffer would remind us, the solution to all this cultural chaos is not just evangelism alone, although that's, of course, imperative. But what Schaeffer wants to emphasize is holistic discipleship, the lordship of Jesus Christ in the whole of life, as he put it. And so that is really our only solution to living a quality Christian life, a devoted Christian life in the midst of a society and culture that's just absolutely unraveling. I mean, there's hardly any way to put it, other way to put it. And I wish every Christian would post this in their home somewhere and refer to it and pray about it on a regular basis. And this is a poster, many of you know, that dates back to World War I, and it's British. And you can imagine years after the war is over, a little boy playing on the floor with his toy soldiers and whatever, and daughter sitting in her father's lap and all. And by the way, Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? Well, we have a great culture war going on right now. And this question is just as pertinent to us as it was to that generation of adults who lived through World War I. So what are we doing to counter all this toxic anti-Christ propaganda that we're being besieged with today in America? So it's a serious question to ponder, to say the least. All right, we talk about Francis Schaeffer, his early life and ministry, his unique calling. Contemporary Christianity lacks wise and prophetic voices amid all the spiritual, all the moral, and all the cultural chaos in America today. We need a comprehensive Christian worldview. Greg Jasson, who lived at L'Abri for a while and has later written about Schaeffer's ministry, writes that what Schaeffer, along with the more scholarly C.S. Lewis, provided in the turbulent last half of the 20th century was an unprecedented confidence that historic Christianity could compellingly contend in the circle of ideas at any level and fear no issue. There's nothing that we can't rise to the occasion to endorse or refute in terms of ideas that are swirling around today. But what it does take is what I would consider, I think C.S. Lewis actually said this explicitly, the most rare of all the virtues, which is courage. In Lewis, we have somebody who's a very prolific author. He puts forth a biblically based Christian assessment of philosophy, theology, history, economic, government, culture, and the arts. And you see there that the Christian faith, represented by Jesus here in the upper right-hand corner, ego sum via veritas et vita, in other words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Well, it's competing in the marketplace, you might say, with all these other worldviews and philosophies as well, everything from Buddhism to communism to the New Age to just secular humanism and so on. All right, as far as Schaeffer's background and spiritual conversion, we'll go into that in some detail in our course. We'll talk about his partnership with his wife, Edith Saville. And they marry fairly early in life, and she is a great partner in his ministry throughout his career. We'll talk about the influence of his seminary education at Westminster Theological Seminary, where he came under the influence of Reformed theologians like Cornelius Van Til and John Gresham Machen, Abraham Kuyper, Gerhardus Voss, and so on. And in particular, the influence of John Gresham Machen's book, Christianity and Liberalism, written in 1923. We would call that today probably Christianity and so-called, quote, progressive Christianity, or as Millie rightly puts it, progressive religion, because it's not true biblical Christianity. His early ministerial career, we'll talk about. His appointment by a conservative Presbyterian organization to go to Europe and serve as a missionary in Europe. He and his wife will settle in Switzerland, and they'll basically live there the rest of their married life. And as one biographer has put it, going to Switzerland was the beginning of an intense spiritual warfare that would last all their lives. Why such an intense spiritual warfare? Well, because virtually the only thing that represented, quote, Christianity in Europe after World War II was theological liberalism and neo-orthodoxy. Then also, of course, there was Roman Catholicism, and Schaeffer, being raised in the Reformed tradition, had a difficult time at first relating to Roman Catholics. There were also problems within his conservative fundamentalist Presbyterian denomination, the Bible Presbyterian Church, or the PBC. And then, of course, overwhelmingly, though, what he has to contend with in his ministry in Europe is post-war secularism, skepticism, and despair. In particular, nihilism and existentialism are the dominant trends in Europe after that horrifying experience of World War II. And you can imagine how the theodicy issue was constantly coming up. You know, how could a good God allow this mass extermination of people? Some 60 million overall who were killed in World War II. How could a good and a great God allow something like that? So you can imagine World War II really promoted secularistic ideas, skepticism, and despair, and many would just cease to believe in God altogether. Schaeffer comes to the understanding that the Christian faith should not only be proclaimed, but it has to be defended against all these attacks by others. And he comes to the realization that there's only one reason, of course, to believe in biblical Christianity, and that would be why. It's true. Okay, it's true, but we have to understand how to defend its truth. Okay. It's not just a crutch for weak people, okay, but it's actually true, and its veracity can be defended very effectively, and that's, of course, through Christian apologetics. One commentator on Schaeffer's life, Ben Mitchell, puts it this way: Schaeffer's legacy is not primarily his intellectual contributions to the Christian faith, although those were considerable. His greatest gift, though, was to provide a strategy and the courage to invade a culture of hopelessness and meaninglessness with a credible message of hope and meaningfulness. So that's basically chapter one. Now, chapter two in the book focuses on the ministry there at L'Abri, and you see the original cottage there that he and his wife and their family occupied. It will be throughout the 60s and 70s, it will attract probably tens of thousands of people coming there to spend the night, sometimes stay a week or a month or more, and work there in conjunction with that ministry. And again, one of the most unique Christian ministries you can ever imagine, and a very, very powerful witness to the veracity of the Christian faith. Now, as Schaeffer put it, the ministry, the mission of L'Abri was to show forth by demonstration in our life and our work the existence of God. And furthermore, to provide honest answers to honest questions. Okay. So in other words, the Christian faith it cannot just be proclaimed, it has to be exemplified and worked out, you know, in the context of our relationships. And by all accounts, he succeeds brilliantly in that respect. Applying a comprehensive Christian worldview to all the issues of life. And this comes through lectures and discussions on the Bible, on theology and history, philosophy, religions, comparative religions, law, ethics, social issues, cultural issues, science and the arts, and so on. So there were no boundaries to this ministry. I mean, they addressed anything and everything that came up as serious questions and serious challenges to the Christian faith. J.I. Packer, many of you are familiar with him. He wrote one of the most influential books, probably of the 20th century, by a Christian, Knowing God. If I remember right, that was published, I think, in 1972. And Packer puts it this way: L'Abri served as a study center, a rescue mission, an extended family, a clinic, a spiritual convalescent home, and a local church. Now, if you've seen pictures of Schaeffer, Francis Schaeffer had his own, let me put it delicately, his own unique look, okay? We'll talk more about that. But anyway, it's said that he dressed like kind of conventional Swiss people would have dressed maybe 100 or 200 years ago, wore knickers and everything else. But when it came to their church services on Sundays at L'Abri, he would arrive wearing a tuxedo. He's a unique creature made in God's image. We'll again talk more about that. Here's one reporter that wrote, L'Abri became a place where thoughtful young Christians went to breathe the fortifying alpine air and to sit at the feet of their goateed guru. L'Abri's remote location provided a haven for Christians who felt exhausted by the culture that raised them. And again, this is in the 60s and 70s, and a culture that exhausts people, the 60s and 70s can't compare to today and what our young people have to contend with today. Here's another commentator who says, L'Abri was not a monastery. It was an equipping center and a learning community with a goal of transforming individuals through engaging their whole person, their mind, their heart, their passions, and then sending them out to transform culture. His prophetic theme, Western societies and culture, he would write and teach, have become post-Christian. I mean, not that they were ever legitimately Christian, so we always use that term post-Christian in quotes, floundering in the muck of relativism, irrationality, and decadence. And if life is absurd and has no meaning and purpose, then truly there's no reason to commit ourselves to anything above and beyond our own ego and our own egoistic impulses. And Schaeffer understands this, and it's a theme he constantly will come back to. He also functions as a cultural watchman. In 1 John 2:15, we read, love not the world. And in the context, as you all know, it's not saying don't love the people of this world. We obviously do love people of this world, or should, but it's talking about the world system. And don't be conformed to it, okay? The way that people in general think and live their lives. So Christianity is, by its very nature, a radical counterculture in the true sense. Schaeffer also wrote a lot warning evangelicals of the problem of what he called enculturation. In other words, adopting the standards, the values, the priorities of this world system. And his last book that he wrote was called The Great Evangelical Disaster. I would highly recommend every serious evangelical Christian to read that book. He wrote it he finished writing it early in 1984, just a few months before he died. The Great Evangelical Disaster. Now, he, to come back to a theme I've already mentioned, he understands that as Christians, we're to share the gospel, and you can do that through your personal testimony and how Jesus has transformed your life and values and priorities in life and so on. But we must integrate proclamation of the gospel with an effective persuasive argument as well. And that, again, is where apologetics comes into play. So Schaeffer will emphasize an integrated understanding of discipleship that includes proclamation. In other words, sharing what you believe based on what Scripture clearly teaches, taking every opportunity to evangelize, but also integrate apologetics so that people that question and doubt the truthfulness of the Christian faith will be, under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, persuaded that the Bible really is a repository of true spiritual, of spiritual truth. So we need proclamation, but we also need persuasion. And, we have to integrate both of those concepts. When it comes to his views on philosophy and apologetics, I'll skip over this because it needs further explanation. And I don't think just looking at these words on the screen probably mean a whole lot, but we'll come back and we'll emphasize this in our course. And it's certainly emphasized in the book. As far as his approach to apologetics, well, obviously, the Christian apologist probably a favorite Bible verse is 1 Peter 3:15 and also 1:13, and that is, prepare your minds for action. In your heart, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and with respect. The way we present ourselves and the way we present the gospel is very, very important. And in some respects, it's as important as the message itself. And so these two verses are key to the whole role and purpose of Christian apologetics. Now you see that apologetics basically functions in two respects. One is to educate believers, also to edify believers, build up their faith, and to equip believers. But it's also to engage non-believers who doubt, again, the truthfulness of the Christian faith, presenting the Christian faith as a factual and a rational belief system that's comprehensive and coherent and consistent. And in fact, it's the only belief system, the only religion, the only philosophy of life that you can say that about. Most other philosophies and religion have some truth, obviously. Only Christianity is one that can be verified as being consistent, coherent, and comprehensive in addressing the whole range of life issues. This requires more explanation as well, so I'm going to skip past this. And in this chapter on philosophy and apologetics, we talk about the tripartite nature of philosophy. And basically, philosophy is broken down into three categories. One is metaphysics or ontology, and that's basically the nature of what is, what exists. Epistemology is how we can know what is or what exists. And then axiology deals with morals and ethics. And you see there the graphic branches of philosophy. Actually, philosophy, of course, is far more diverse than just metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, but it does, those are actually the core of philosophy. And again, we'll explicate that. We'll go into detail on that and why that's so significant and important for Christians to understand. And by the way, along with axiology, the emphasis on morals and ethics and all, it takes us back to basic principles of natural law. All right, now chapter 5 deals with his book. Mark asked, if there was one book in particular I'd recommend, it would probably be How Should We Then Live? As I say there, it's a historical and philosophical tour de force. It's also a theological tour de force, by the way, as well. Schaeffer, in that book, will constantly be warning against the trends that we see in world civilization since World War II. And these are trends, of course, that secular culture critics have addressed, like Aldous Huxley in Brave New World and George Orwell in Animal Farm in 1984. C.S. Lewis also addressed some of these trends rather obliquely in That Hideous Strength and so on. And so Schaeffer will come back to these ideas. And there are trends, like I said, since World War II in Western civilization, and certainly in American society and culture and in our history recently, that we need to be very, very well aware of and very cognizant of where this is leading us. And as we see constantly the erosion of our freedoms in this country, including constant attacks on religious freedom in America. I'll skip that, and also these graphs. Chapter 6 deals with Christian social activism or cultural activism, and talks about how we can't be ignorant of or unconcerned about our political culture, because if we truly love others as we should, the laws that govern people's lives are extremely important. It's part of holistic Christian discipleship. And with that, he will constantly come back to the problem of pietism, this idea that some people want to have, and that is that their, quote, religious faith just affects them personally, and how they relate to their family, perhaps, and their church, and so on. But beyond that, the Christian faith really doesn't have much at all to say about the wider world. Like I said, everything from politics to the arts and everything in between. And so that's pietism, and Schaeffer's constantly coming back to that issue and addressing it. In the context of Jesus' greatest commandment to love others as we love ourselves. And the question is, how can we love others if we are totally indifferent toward the kind of laws and the kind of public policies that regulate and oftentimes control their lives? Then the 7th chapter is kind of the summa of it all. And I look at 3 criticisms of Schaeffer in his life and ministry, and we address that in chapter 7. And I won't take the time to go into those, but we will come back and revisit that. And then I end the book with his legacy, quotes from some notable Christians, and like Billy Graham. He was truly one of the great evangelical statesmen of our generation. He was no ivory tower intellectual, but he had a deep commitment to people and a profound commitment to evangelism. More than virtually any other thinker, he had keen insight into the major theological and philosophical battles of our time. J.I. Packer again. Francis Schaeffer was an amazing man, intellectually brilliant, and just rigidly, absolutely set on truth. Emotionally intense, devoted to God and very, very compassionate. Like Jeremiah, he was perplexed by the world, but not because he didn't understand the world, but because he did understand the world and its values and our place as Christians in the world. Here's Os Guinness. I've never met anyone with such a passion for God, combined with a passion for people, combined with a passion for truth. That is an extremely rare combination, and Francis Schaeffer embodied all that. He was quite simply the most brilliant and compassionate face-to-face apologist I have ever met. He was not an ivory tower kind of academic, but very much somebody who loved engaging people one-on-one. And regardless of whether they were honest, sincere seekers of truth or just trying to play silly intellectual games, he would accord them as much respect as possible and take their comments. And he once engaged, by the way, Timothy Leary once visited L'Abri. Timothy Leary, the high priest of LSD back in the 60s. He stopped in at L'Abri for a couple of days. And Schaeffer tried to relate the truth of the gospel with people like that as well.
You took a trip to L'Abri?
Yes, Paul, that's very good. Paul said, did Timothy Leary take a trip to L'Abri? And yes, in fact, the reason he was in Europe was he was fleeing prosecution here in the United States. So here's Chuck Colson, Francis Schaeffer, one of the great prophets of the 20th century. Don Williams, Schaeffer has never been replaced by another voice of equal stature. Wow, that's quite a reputation. And I ended the book saying, to live faithfully and effectively for Christ in contemporary post-Christian America, students and adults alike are well advised to read and absorb and interact with the thoughts, the insights, and challenges that they'll encounter in the writings of two modern sages, C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. So there is the book, and there's more to this, but for time's sake, I'd like to cut it off at this point so we can get into the study guide outline. Comments, questions, anything that could use any explanation or anything that particularly impressed or depressed you?
I like the fact that he said he spent 55 minutes with somebody listening to them, and then he'd spend 5 minutes reaching out to them with the gospel. And another one that stuck out in my mind, it was like listening to Elmer Fudd on steroids.
Yes, he was a unique creature created in God's image. And his looks, his speech, his mannerisms were distinctive. Yes, yes. You wouldn't confuse Francis Schaeffer with anyone else you've ever known. Yeah. Yeah.
Jeffrey, how did he
Yes.
define the word gospel? Because you mentioned testimony and things like
Mhm.
that, and
Mhm.
that's not what the gospel is.
Mhm.
You know, so how would he define it so we'll know going forward when we hear that?
Yeah, well, he of course, as much as anyone you can imagine, was rigidly biblically centered. And so his understanding of the gospel is that we are created in the image of God, but we are fallen, we are sinners, we're out of sync with God's will, and we have no personal relationship with God until we are spiritually regenerated. And so he's very orthodox in that respect. And that is preeminently what the Christian faith is all about. And like I said, he defines himself essentially as, he said on one occasion, I'm just a simple evangelist. Well, he wasn't simple, that's for sure, but he was an evangelist. By the way, you might find it interesting, C.S. Lewis also defined himself as an evangelist, but certainly not the stereotypical evangelist. Like all true evangelical Christians, he understands that our calling in life is to be rightly related to God, and this requires a spiritual rebirth. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Jeffrey, Nicole has her hand raised.
Yes, Nicole. Nicole, you're muted right now. Can you unmute yourself? Nicole? I'll,
Maybe that was an earlier one.
yeah, has it been up for a
I'm
while?
not sure, I just happened to notice it, so.
Well, I'll try to come back to Nicole in a few minutes. Maybe she's had to leave temporarily. All right. Okay, anything else before we continue on, Bruce?
I don't know if you or anybody else has any idea, but how would the demographics look of the people who showed up at Liberty? I've often felt that rather a smaller percentage of it than we think were actually believing Christians. They were attracted by his iconoclastic reputation and the oddness of the place and many things. I mean, Nancy Piercy saw the book Escape from Reason, thought it was a book by the drug culture, went to Liberty, you know. So people came from all sorts of reasons.
Yes.
But I wonder if we have, they weren't coming thinking they were going to get this new spiritual leader. There was just somebody who was trying to reinterpret I don't know, cultural issues and stuff, so forth.
Right, just
Very-
kind of
very
a
messed up.
kind of a sage. They're
Yeah,
looking for a
yeah.
sage, you know, or a spiritual guru or something. Well, it was very diverse. Again, there were thousands of people. Some were mature adults, but the vast majority were people in their probably 20s or maybe 30s. A lot were Christians who were burned out on fundamentalist Christianity. And a lot of others were refugees from liberal churches who had come to doubt most everything about the Bible and the Christian faith. And they thought, as a last resort, maybe this guy could help, you know. A lot of hippies, a lot of backpackers, just general, quote, truth seekers. Some were very serious about seeking truth. For others, it was just kind of an intellectual pursuit. But I'd say predominantly it's people in their 20s and 30s. And by the way, of course, the Jesus movement erupts there in the 1970s. And a lot of those who were involved in the Jesus movement were very attracted to Francis Schaeffer as well.
Do you know how long the ministry was in active operation of number one and number two? How was it funded?
The ministry began in the late 50s, about 1957 or so. And he dies in 1984. And the ministry is still going on. In fact, there are about 10 Libris around the world. There's one on every continent except Antarctica, strangely. Can't imagine why. But there's two here in the United States. One's in Minnesota and one's in Massachusetts. There's one in England. There's two in Switzerland. There's one in, I believe it's Belgium or the Netherlands. One in Australia and so on. So there's 10 of them, and they're still functioning. And what was the?
How were they funded?
How are they funded? In a most unorthodox way. Francis Schaeffer, and the more you get to know him, the more this is unsurprising. He did not believe in manipulative fundraising tactics and techniques that so many nonprofit organizations and ministries use. And so truly, they just presented their financial needs in prayer and prayed for God to answer their prayers and for people to come voluntarily and support what they were doing. And they experienced, great success in that respect. But it wasn't the kind of programmatic fundraising techniques that are so typical of so many ministries. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Nicole, are you there with us? And if so, you could unmute yourself there and
I am so sorry, Dr. Jeffrey. It was an accident. I'm challenged in the technological world.
oh, I can't relate to that at all.
Right. I hear you, but I'm here and I'm glad to be here. So
Wonderful to have you with us. So
Oh.
you didn't have a particular question or anything or?
Oh boy. I'm saving it up. So
Okay.
I will someday, someday
Well-
soon I will.
Well, I only accept questions that I can answer.
Right, there you go. Yeah, that's
Oh.
right. And nothing future oriented. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks, Nicole.
Blessings.
hear
Thank
from
you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Is there one more comment, I think? And then, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, yes. I never mastered that.
Jeffrey, did Ray Mellencamp try to chime in there?
Ray, were you going to comment? Ray Mellencamp, were you? It was not. Okay. All right. All right. Well, if you'll turn in your study guide then to page 1, the preface, and we'll from here on we'll be going pretty systematically through the study guide. We can't cover everything that's in there in the time we have, so I would really encourage you to read the book and read the chapters ahead of time, because we, again, for time's sake, won't be able to cover everything. And any questions or pertinent comments, please don't hesitate. All right, now, I think I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation that I first encountered Francis Schaeffer in the mid-70s, a couple of years after college. I read his apologetics trilogy, The God Who Is There, Escape from Reason, and He Is There and He Is Not Silent, all of which I think impacted my intellectual and my spiritual development at the time. Prior to that, I was familiar with apologetics. I had read Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict and C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and as I mentioned, Clark Pinnock's Set Forth Your Case. But Schaeffer was really the first Christian cultural apologist that I read. And due to my interest back then in history and philosophy and contemporary issues, he immediately became one of my favorite authors. And at the time, I was also influenced by and very much involved in the Jesus movement of the early to mid 1970s. Now, the Jesus movement, some of you are probably pretty familiar with it, others maybe not, but it was really the last great spiritual, kind of widespread spiritual renewal movement or revival in American history. It primarily attracted young adults, and in fact, it started with basically hippies and former drug users and all who found Christ, but it really mushroomed from there. And 4 years before I returned back to graduate school to study American history and get a doctorate in American history, I worked for the companies that produced most of the popular Jesus music, as it was called back then. And that would include artists like Larry Norman, Barry McGuire, Phil Keaggy, Keith Green, the second chapter of Acts, and also Chuck Girard. And I mentioned Chuck Girard in particular because Alyssa Childers, who's speaking tomorrow night at Mount Bethel, she's the daughter of Chuck Girard. He's very, very gifted singer, songwriter, recording artist. So partly as a result of Schaeffer's influence, I sensed back then, I still believe that authentic Christianity should be in many respects countercultural. So my wife and I were involved in the house church movement for many years. And we were also drawn to various Christian communities around the country in the 70s as well. Now, Schaeffer, as I mentioned in the presentation, along with C.S. Lewis, probably one of the two most significant and influential Christian thinkers of the 20th century. And also, I would put him, as I said, in that elite list of probably the 20 most influential, significant figures in all of American Christian history. So I think he's extremely important. But unfortunately, and unlike C.S. Lewis, whose influence has continued to expand since Lewis's death in 1963, Schaeffer's legacy has unfortunately diminished since he passed away in 1984. And I find that very regrettable, as I think his message is even more relevant. I think it's more necessary today than it was back in the 70s and 80s. And I see Ray nodding over here. And Ray, you had, when we got together a few weeks ago, you had talked about how much Schaeffer meant in your spiritual life. And I'd like to give you an opportunity, maybe next week or the week after, to share a little bit about that, because I know he's probably one of the primary influences in your life. Yeah. So we live in an unprecedented time in American history. The forces of spiritual darkness have infiltrated, they have corrupted every aspect of our society and culture, including many churches and including entire denominations. Now, we desperately need more Christian leaders who have the knowledge, who have the wisdom and the courage to honestly and very forthrightly address the great evils of our day. And I hope that this course and the book on Schaeffer, even though it's just merely an introduction to Schaeffer, I hope that God will use it in a unique way to help stimulate your thinking and maybe make all the more impact on how you relate your Christian faith to everyone that you encounter. Now, a whole lot more could be written on Schaeffer. This book is only 180 pages, and probably to totally cover his life in depth and his contributions in depth would take a 600 or 800 page book. But I think you'll find there's a lot of good content in the book. And so in the appendix, by the way, of your study guide, there is, for further reading, there's some sources cited in there that I'd encourage you to check out. Yes.
Well, you mentioned again here courage and how we need courage. It's probably the most important virtue. On my way home today, I was listening to the Sebastian Gorka program, and he had David Limbaugh and David Limbaugh's daughter on. They've written a new book, and they talked about that very thing for about 5 or 10 minutes, how important it is and how rare it is these days that churches, Christian people don't have much courage, and we are desperately in need of that. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of people that agree with that, and hopefully things are happening to counter the weakness.
Well, in certain situations, there's so much pressure to conform.
Yeah.
And probably many of you could share, testimonials related to that. And so it takes great faith, but also great courage, to stand up against the overwhelming forces that we all face, and that is to conform to the politically correct, fads of the day. Yeah. Pamela?
I want to say, but it also, every time you mentioned something like this, you mentioned some person or some group of people who come forth and have become the leaders. I mean, they didn't set out to become, I don't think Francis Schaeffer set out, I'm going to be a leader.
No, he didn't.
He was who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And by being brave to be who he was, he attracted many people.
Mhm.
And right now, I don't know of any people that seem to portray is the wrong word, seem to appear in that light.
Well, certainly in contemporary evangelical Christianity, there's a dearth of people that have that kind of courage to speak out aggressively and forcefully and biblically on, the great evils that confront us. So we desperately need more Christian leaders who have the knowledge. Well, you have to have the knowledge, also the wisdom and the courage to honestly, forthrightly confront the evils of our time. And so this course and my book on Schaeffer, mine and Eric's book, by the way, is, as I said, a mere introduction to a person whom God used in such creative, such unique and effective ways. And as I said, a whole lot more could be written and a whole lot more has been written, but hopefully it'll be a very helpful introduction to the life and ministry of this very, very unique individual, both he and his wife, by the way. And I hope that what we talk about going forth over the next several weeks inspires us all to delve more deeply into his life, his works, his contributions. More importantly, though, I pray that we take the insights offered and by God's grace and guidance, allow these insights not only to inform and inspire our own spiritual lives, but also to motivate us to seriously consider how to arrange our life and our priorities in life in such a way as to have the maximum effect possible among those in our individual circles of influence, be they family or friends or just casual acquaintances. And again, if you look on page 2 of the study guide, you see the quote that I cited in the PowerPoint presentation. Through my work, there's a common unifying theme, which I would define as the lordship of Christ in the totality of life. If Christ is indeed the Lord, he must be Lord of all of life and spiritual matters, of course, but just as much across the whole spectrum of life, including intellectual matters and areas of culture and law and government. Those are all very important. I would want to emphasize from the beginning to end throughout my work the importance of evangelism, the need to walk daily with our Lord and study his word and live a life of prayer and to show forth the love and compassion and holiness of the Lord. But we must also emphasize equally and at the same time the need to live this out in every area of culture and society. And talk about a timeless quote, the quote there from C.T. Studd, which undoubtedly you've heard and probably know it as well as I, only one life will soon be past. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Only what's done for Christ will last. So that quote, along with that, Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? Again, I'd highly encourage you to feature that prominently in your home and reflect and meditate on the C.T. Studd quote and the poster as well. All right. Well, if you look there at page 3, the introduction to the course, basically, or to the book, Whatever Happened, and I call this Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And I, in the book, write about the 5 horsemen of the American apocalypse. Now, that's kind of a takeoff on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that we encounter in the book of Revelation. But I think when it comes to America in particular, there's 5 forces that are corrupting, perverting, destroying individual lives and our society in general. Ever since World War II, the only country in the world that's had the resources and the power to impact world events in a positive manner is the United States. What percentage of the world population are privileged to live in the United States? About 5, something like that, about 5%, 1 out of 20 people in the world. And it is indeed a great privilege, but it also carries with it great responsibility as well. I'm sure there are people who live in Bolivia and Bulgaria and Bangladesh who, I guess, love their country, but frankly, those countries have no impact on a wider scale. America does. And for reasons that presumably we'll never know until we face God, post, in the next realm of reality. For some reason, God chose for us to be born and to live in America at this time in history. And it's a time in which we need to be really proactively engaged because we're losing the uniqueness of this nation. And I look back here at Bei Huang, who was born and raised in China. And by God's grace, she's been able to relocate here in the United States. Pardon me?
Escape China to here.
Yes, escaped China to here. And under the influence and tutelage of Bruce and Pamela, among others, Bei is growing in her faith just, immeasurably. And what a wonderful testimony. And I know you're so very thankful that you're living in a relatively free country compared to, the country you left behind.
Yes. It sounds like I come to another world.
Bei is saying that it's like she came to another world. And that's not a bad way to put it, actually. So there are other nations in the world that can impact world affairs, but they're all negative. There's China, there's Russia, there's Iran, there's North Korea. But when you think of the only country in the world that can impact world affairs and influence the world in a positive way, it's the United States. And we're exceedingly fortunate to be Americans. But America is in steep decline. Our institutions and our traditional values have been undermined to the point that not only America, but much of the rest of the world appears to be moving towards some great catastrophe. Virtually every day, we witness more examples of the breakdown in our nation of law and order, personal morality, public decency, just basic decency, and civility in general. Greg Jesson, who lived at L'Abri for a while and has written about Schaeffer, writes that all the literature, the philosophy, theology, science, political thought, the art, the music, and culture that brought about the greatest accomplishment and freedoms in the history of the earth, all of that is quickly melting away the stability we once took for granted. What was once unthinkable is now beyond dispute. And when you look at the moral climate in America today, things are being not only tolerated, but absolutely celebrated that only 10 or 20 years ago would have been virtually unthinkable. Law and politics, including geopolitics, are important. So is economics. So is the state of our culture. All of this directly affects the quality of human life. However, such matters as those are only of penultimate value. As Christians, we understand that what really matters most are the ultimate issues of life. And the ultimate issues of life are, is there in fact a supreme being, a creator God? And if so, what is his character and his nature like? What does it mean to be a human being? And what are the realities of human nature? Why is it that we seem to be capable of incredible acts of kindness and love and compassion and even self-sacrificial love? And on the other hand, we're capable of just the most despicable behavior imaginable, things that probably would shame most of the animal world. Are some things objectively right and wrong? In other words, what are the realities of morality and ethics, or is everything just relative? Is everything just a matter of opinion? So these are the ultimate issues of life. And Scripture speaks very clearly on these issues and many others as well. As Christians, we believe that the root cause of all the evil in the world stems from humanity's fundamental problem, which the Bible calls sin. And it's sin in all of its ugly manifestations. Sin, how is it manifested? Well, we don't have time to go into it all, but certainly jealousy, bitterness, rivalries, a spirit of competition, the impulse to dominate and control other people. Those are all manifestations of sin. Egoism, narcissistic egoism, self-centeredness, materialism, hedonism, the obsession with power and wealth and status and position and worldly success. All those are manifestations of our sinful nature. And the social consequences of sin impact our culture, and they impact all of our cultural institutions. And this is the root cause of all of our social pathologies. Everything from social injustice, racism, racialism, sexism, class prejudice, preferring some people because they're of a higher socioeconomic class than others. Sexual chaos, everything from cohabitation to illegitimate sex, divorce, pornography, abortion, homosexuality, corporate and institutional exploitation and corruption. Well, look at the dramatic changes in corporate America in just the last 20 years. Erroneously, corporate America used to be considered kind of a bastion of, quote, conservative or traditional values. Well, that's gone forever. And perhaps you've noticed political corruption. Okay. Slight problem, minor problem.
Yeah, just.
Yes, yes. Now, one of Francis Schaeffer's most influential books was Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And that was a book that he wrote along with the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, right? Surgeon General, I'm sorry, C. Everett Koop. And that was primarily addressing the abortion issue. But whatever happened to the human race? Well, like I said, we're 40 years beyond that book now. And I'm sure Schaeffer would just be astonished by how degenerate. Yeah, how degenerate American society in general has become in the last 40 years. In contemporary America, most of our social and moral pathologies are the results of 5 no longer subtle and very insidious agendas, and they would be, as I mentioned, in the PowerPoint presentation, secularism, in other words, a totally godless humanistic view of life, socialism, a transnational global socialist political system in which government seeks to regulate and control most every area of life. And by the way, all that comes at the expense of personal responsibility. Joe Biden wants to cancel student debts, student loan debts. How could that possibly be justified, morally, ethically? And what does that say to all those who sacrificed for years and years to pay off their student debts? It's nothing but a shameless vote buying scheme. Socialism, it comes at the expense of not only personal responsibility, but also at the expense of personal freedom as well, individual freedom. Sexualism, making libertine sexual so-called freedom in all of its variations a dominant driving force in how we think and how we act. The most sacred and holy sacrament of the sexual revolution is abortion. Racialism, an obsession with racial identity and race-based social and political agendas. Think of how that's corrupted our society. Anesthetism, a loss of normal sensation or awareness, the dulling of one's sensitivities to normal stimulation. Constant exposure to audio and visual overstimulation. Social media, video games, frenetic music, just insane music. TV, nonstop entertainment. All of this dulls our sensitivities. And, you know, when you're exposed to all of these stimuli and you don't use discretion, what you find is that, well, let's take, for example, music. If you constantly expose yourself to garbage music, after a while, you lose the capacity to appreciate the good from the ugly, the good from the bad from the ugly. And I think that goes for all these entertainment media as well, television, movies, and so on. A tiny percent are absolutely great. Vast majority is of no value whatsoever. Cultural Marxism, as promoted by the Democratic Party, seeks to secularize, socialize, sexualize, racialize, and anesthetize every aspect of our society and culture. So these are matters to be taken seriously. Let me pause now. We're just about out of time, just a couple of minutes, and comments or questions or anything that, yes, Joseph, yeah.
I just wondering, is the five horsemen of the five cities agendas, or is that something?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch
Five
the first.
horsemen? Five horsemen?
Oh, the five horsemen, yeah.
Five cities agendas, or is that something?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a term I came up with, sort of a play on the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelation.
It's the same as the agendas?
Yes, yes. So in recent years, I had talked about the first four of those, and then it occurred to me that actually there's a fifth one, and that is this demonic agenda to just overwhelm us with overstimulation to the point where a lot of people lose the capacity to think clearly and rationally. Yeah. And whether most of it's intentional or not, certainly Satan uses that, you know. And think of it this way, anything that's not mentally healthy can't possibly be spiritually healthy. And we live in a society and culture that frankly is not mentally healthy, you know, in terms of all the overstimulation and the perverse stimulation that we're subjected to. Anything else? Yes, Bill?
Did Schaeffer emphasize discipleship as much as evangelism? Did he, you know, emphasize how important, you know, we're to go make disciples? Go.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that's primarily what would distinguish him from so many evangelists. And that is, he understands that evangelism is an integral part of a comprehensive Christian worldview. And it doesn't stop with being, quote, saved. That's only the gateway or the gate into the kingdom of God. But we're called, and churches are called to make disciples, you know, in the most holistic way possible. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we wrap things up for this evening? Yes, Ray?
I would just say, I grew up in kind of a legalistic environment where there were rules against everything. And reading Francis Schaeffer gave me the freedom to go and read directly out of John Paul Sartre.
Mm-hmm.
And the other philosophers.
Yeah, because you realize that Christianity is true. which means you don't have to be afraid of any alternative philosophy or religion. You have the capacity to see the fallacies in those. And so you don't shun all those forces that are so influential, whether it's in the case of Sartre, whether it's existentialism, secular existentialism, or any postmodernism or any other false philosophy. Yeah. Mhm. And Janet, I see that your hand is up, so we'll let you kind of close us out.
Oh, I just had a quick question. That statistic that you shared really hit me because I teach American literature. So I teach a lot of historical documents in class. 5% of the world, 5% of us are privileged to live in this nation. Wow.
Yes.
That's
yes.
smaller than I realized.
And as we'll talk about, further, and as I oftentimes come back to in our Sunday morning class, A History of Christianity in America, American history is just full of horrible things that happened that are just shameful and disgusting. But we don't compare American history to utopian perfection, because there is no such thing on earth. We compare America to everywhere else on earth. And by that comparison, we are just exceedingly privileged.
I agree with you.
We never want to sanitize American history because that's not intellectually or morally credible. On the other hand, though, we don't want to play into the hands of the left, the socialist left that hates America. And what they hate most about America is precisely the aspects of American tradition and heritage that we most appreciate and are grateful for. Yeah,
Yes.
like the Christian influences.
Mm-hmm.
America, for all its faults, has been uniquely influenced. Again, that's something to really celebrate and thank God
It
for.
is. It is. And guess what? My sister and brother-in-law are today in Gettysburg. They're going to be there for a couple of days, taking pictures to send me for my class.
Gettysburg is just a phenomenal place to visit. And we went 9 years ago for the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. There were 20,000 reenactors, Confederate and Union reenactors, and it was an amazing thing to see. So I hope they thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and Joseph?
One last thing, I hear what you're saying about the student loan payoff.
Yes.
How would you also characterize the bailout of the banks as some sort of socialist thing? Also?
Yeah, oh yeah, very definitely. Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about going back to the Bush administration, the last. Yes, yeah, yeah, I agree. And all that is running up these, gosh, what is the debt now? 30 trillion? Isn't it 30 trillion? Okay, here's the closing question. When did the American national debt first reach $1 trillion? It was about 1980, maybe 1981 or something like that. So in the last 40 years, the national debt has gone from 1 trillion to 30 trillion. And it's going to just absolutely overload and destroy the economy.
Yes, Bill Buchanan, he's commenting, it's 31 trillion, I think.
31 trillion.
Is that what
Almost.
you just wrote?
Almost 31 trillion. Okay. And that's just the most gross financial irresponsibility imaginable. But politicians realize that it buys votes. And for a lot of them, that's all that matters. Millie?
Well, Bill Buchanan wrote that it's America is 4.25% of the world population.
4.25, okay, so under 5%, okay.
You can set those statistics.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Good being with you as always. And I hope that was an adequate introduction to what should be, I think, a very rich study over the next couple of months as we explore the life and the works and the legacy of Francis Schaeffer and his great contributions. So thanks for joining us. And those of you who join us online, thank you all as well. Blessings on the rest of your week.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that very much.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, during the, I was overseas and